Hello everyone and welcome to a tutorial video concerning the original Bitcoin paper, which discusses the design of Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. So this is kind of the protocol of Bitcoin, whereas there's some videos out there on how Bitcoin mining works and all of that. But this video is going to be discussing Bitcoin as a monetary system. So anybody who's interested in what Bitcoin is and what it represents as a monetary system and how it works and why, scientifically, why it's so good, this video should help you out. So if you spent much time at all looking into Bitcoin, you've probably quickly found yourself being directed to this Bitcoin paper. Then you're finding yourself, skipping over bits of information and then probably soon giving up completely on understanding it. See, there are political and philosophical ideas that back up Bitcoin and why you ought to use it and what makes it awesome. But then there's also scientific reasons that are just phenomenal. See, Bitcoin's invention, the actual solution or solutions that Bitcoin has solved, it's an incredible feat that many people still can't believe that it's even been done. And it actually solves multiple highly complex problems all at once. So the paper describes this system that I've just told you a little bit about above. The problem is the paper is extremely challenging to a typical person or even someone who knows a little bit about programming, networking, and cryptography. First off, the paper is highly condensed. The full paper describing this amazing Bitcoin and protocol and all this, 8 pages long, and the 9th page is reference. So in a mere 8 pages, Bitcoin is just completely condensed, and this solution to an impossible problem is just like shot at you, right? This task of actually writing all this down in 8 pages alone is actually pretty impressive, but it proves pretty challenging to consume for many people. So what I'm going to do is attempt to break this paper down completely for anyone who's interested or anyone who's confused about something. So this is going to be a full, complete breakdown of this paper. You won't be required to know anything about programming, cryptography, or networking. If I do my job right, you'll learn everything you need to learn here with me in a nice, easy to understand tutorial. So by the end of this, hopefully you'll understand the incredible brilliance of Bitcoin and at least this paper. I make no promises, obviously, again, on the mining part. Probably will cover mining a little bit later. But the actual protocol, how the network works and how it's secure and everything is something that really everyone should understand. Not everyone really needs to know how mining works. So anyways, I'm going to break it down into separate videos explaining each section pretty slowly. Otherwise, this video might be like 10 hours. Some of the sections are really dense and may require many videos, but I'll try to keep them pretty concise and easy to swallow, yet as informative as possible, so you guys really do actually get something out of it if you don't understand what's happening. So my goal basically is to explain literally every word that someone might not know. So you've got hash and you've got proof of work and best effort system that I bet a lot of people just don't even know what that means. So I'm going to show you guys and at least tell you guys, at least with hashing I'll be able to show you guys, but some of these other things it's more of like a concept, so I'll explain those. So I seem to have been able to do this pretty well in Python programming tutorials, so hopefully I can transfer that here for everyone else as well. So first in this video, let's begin with the actual abstract. So here the problem that we're trying to overcome is explained, as well as the very brief introductory solution. So let's review the abstract. Also, if you don't have the paper, you can get the paper by going to bitcoin.org/bitcoin.pdf. I will put a link in the description as well. You don't really necessarily need the paper to follow along. We're going to be literally covering every single line. But if you do want it alongside, or I guess if somebody wants to take notes or something, you can do that. So let's begin. So abstract. A purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. Digital signatures provide part of the solution, but the main benefits are lost if a trusted third party is still required to prevent double spending. So here we've got the problem, and it's discussed. Peer-to-peer electronic cash is obviously just a major goal, and it would be really great if we could achieve this. And the reason why is we could cut out the middleman entirely, and doing this creates extreme efficiency. It's pure. It's perfect, right, if you can do this. So this is known in the computer science world, or at least this problem with a middleman, or at least the necessity for a middleman, is known in the computer science, mostly networking field, as this. It's known as this Byzantine general, or even generals, problem. And the issue is, how can two or more remote entities send messages between each other while also knowing that those messages are authentic and not manipulated in some way? So in the sense of a large network, how do we know that everyone in that network is working towards the right goal, right? So broken down entirely, the problem supposes, like, the reason why it's called this Byzantine general problem, is that this general or generals, they're trying to coordinate an attack or a retreat on the city, and they're trying to do this with their lieutenants. But the problem is, obviously, to coordinate attack, you've got to be spread apart around the city, and you want to, get it on all fronts. But the problem is, how do we send messages to all of the other, groups and armies that, hey, we want to attack now, right? The problem is, first of all, you need the messenger themselves could be a bad person. But the bigger problem is that there might be conspirators who are planning to turn on the general and misreport the attack or retreat commands, right? And so in the computer science idea of this is it's a 0 or a 1, right? So attack would be a 1 and retreat 0, let's say. So the question is, how can we do this? How can we ensure that the messages that are being sent between these generals are legit and they haven't been manipulated along the way? So only until recently there were just proposed beginnings to the solution, and then comes along Satoshi Nakamoto to write an 8-page paper and just completely blast all these problems away. So moving on in the paper, so again, we just kind of explained the beginning and what the problem is. So moving on, back to the abstract. We propose a solution to the double spending problem using a peer-to-peer network. The network timestamps transactions by hashing them into an ongoing chain of hash-based proof of work, forming a record that cannot be changed without redoing that proof of work. So now we're going to discuss, how the Byzantine generals problem applies to Bitcoin, which is a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The main threat to a system like this is the fact that people will lie. People will double spend transactions. So these are the traitorous people, right, in the Byzantine generals problem. This can and will cause the network to become corrupt extremely quickly and pretty much worthless. So it's proposed that the network timestamps and logs transactions, and the transactions occurrences and all this, by hashing them into an ongoing ledger, we'll call it, and as you'll hear it called quite often, which is a hash-based proof of work ledger, which can't be changed without redoing that proof of work. Well, that's a pretty big mouthful, and I imagine a lot of people, this is one of the lines that I think people gloss over. So the first part where people might trip up here is hashing. And we're hashing these timestamps. So what the heck is that? So let's talk about what a hash is. So hash functions are used to generate fixed length bits of data. It's like a shorthand way of it's a shorthand note that corresponds to the original input. So this can be used as a way to store and retrieve data associatively, but in our case, we're actually more interested in its cryptographic benefits. So in cryptography, hashing is used to validate the integrity of data. So with hashing, identical input will always produce an identical hash. So at this point, you might still be thinking, okay, what's a hash though? Right. So I think in the sense of a hash, I think it would be best that I crack out some real hashing and show you guys what a hash is and how it works, and so you can actually visualize the hashing process. So if you have Python 2.7, feel free to open up your idle and follow along. Otherwise, just watch. It'll be a very quick like 1 minute example anyways. It's not too long, but it really, I think, drives the point home of what a hash is, because I bet a lot of people don't know what a hash is. So so let's go ahead and get to that. All right, so here I have brought up Python 2.7 in idle. If you're unfamiliar with Python, it's just a popular programming language. It's very easy. If you're interested in Python, I have a lot of tutorials on them. Anyway, so we've got Python 2.7 up. It's important that you're using Python 2.7. This code won't work in 3.3. You'd have to change up a few things, so just please note that it's 2.7, not Python 3.3. So let's go ahead and begin. So, oh, and just one more thing, as I put the code in here, and then when I run it, it's going to output all the output out here. So that's what to expect if you're not familiar with programming in Python. So, first thing that we want to do is, so we're going to show you guys some hashes. So we're going to import a library called hashlib in Python. Then we're going to go ahead and, well, we're going to be using MD5 hashing. So I'm going to do MD5 hash, and that's my variable name, and we're just going to say that equals hashlib.md5. And then here what we can do is we can begin to test it out. So what we're going to say is we're going to say md5 hash.update, and we want this hash to, we're just going to say this is a sample hash. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to print out this, and we're going to say print md5 hash.hex digest, and that should be it, barring any typos or anything like that. So let's go ahead and save and run that, and now we see our very first hash. So let's go ahead and continue on and explain why one, they're always of equal length. So right, this is a sample hash. Like this probably has more characters than that, but anyway, I'll show you guys another example. So now I'm just going to copy and paste this a couple times. So I'm going to paste this down here, and I'll just throw in a short here. So we'll save and run that again, and you'll see that again we started this first. This is a sample hash, is identical to the previous hash. We could run it again. Again, they're all identical to each other, but actually I'll show you guys what I was about to say in a second. So let's copy this, and now let me just show you. See, like they're all equal length. This is why it's useful for that. But anyway, very long bits of data still have equal length hashes. Wow. Save and run. Anyway, again, you see we have an identical hash there. Now comes a couple of the important parts of hashing. If we take this exact line, copy, paste, you can see right now it's 727 ADE starting, right? We've made a full copy and paste. We're going to save, we're going to run it, and you'll see here that it's different. It's not 727 ADE. Now the original one is 727, so like if we ran this again, the same input produces the same output, but the same input is considering this one, this one, this one, and this one. So by the same token, if we change something in this hash with short right here, and we change it to that, and we run it, you're going to see that not only does like this one stays the same because it's the first, but this one changes, then this one that's unchanged changes, and this one that's unchanged changes. So the order of the input actually it matters. And by that same token, if we, let's say we get rid of all of this and we just print out this is a sample hash, so we see the original same one that we've always been seeing, 24E1 DE blah 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 blah. If we just change this to a Z, right, this is a sample hash, right, tiny minute difference, we run it now, you can see that the hash is pretty much 100% different. I don't see anything that matches up at all, actually. And so you can see here that this is kind of the idea of hashing, and you can maybe start to see, especially as we explain down the road, why this matters with hashing this stuff to this global ledger, why that matters. But hopefully now you have a first-hand idea of what hashing is, what it's going to produce and kind of look like, why the order of input must be the same no matter what, and even a minute difference is going to result in a vastly different outputted hash. But also, if the prior hash is somewhat different, all of the subsequent hashes are going to be just messed up. They're not going to be right. And so that's why hashes are going to represent a very valuable part to Bitcoin. So let's go ahead and revert back to what we were doing. I'm just going to close out of this stuff, and we'll continue on with this paper here. So now that we know what a hash is, at least somewhat, and also I'm not positive I just really drove home the point that it's truly that basically the rules of a hash are that truly identical input always gives identical output. Slightly different input will give drastically different output. And then finally, even if you have like the same singular input, it's still a vastly different output hash. So now that we know and understand what a hash is, and I've just reiterated that, now let's go ahead and attack this notion of a hash-based, so we know what hash is now, proof-of-work system. So this is where the magic happens, because we marry the idea of hash and proof-of-work. And so now let's go ahead and discuss what a proof-of-work system is. So a proof-of-work system, at first and initially in its history, and at least at least the first that I've ever heard of such a thing, is a way to deter like DDoS attacks or even spam. But it can also be used for network protection for very similar reasons why it works with DDoS and spam. So brute forcing, or trying over and over again to break something, becomes very, very costly. So and also, if you don't know what a DDoS attack is, it stands for denial of service, and these attacks are carried out pretty much by like overloading a network with simultaneous requests. So like a request is like you request something from a web server when you visit the web page. So the idea behind a proof of work system is that actual computational work is required to make a request on the network. So for the ease of understanding this, let's go ahead and assume that the request that we're talking about is indeed visiting a web page in your browser. Since in this case you request data from the web server, that data is sent to you in your browser and then displayed for you. So if this web page uses a proof of work system to deter, let's say, DDoS attacks, then each time you visit this website, your computer is going to need to solve a calculation in order to validate its request. So before the web server actually serves it some data, it's going to request that you do something for it first to just kind of legitimize yourself. So the idea here is to make the cost of a brute force or DDoS attack or spam quite high in terms of CPU power, since both brute force and DDoS attacks are usually in like the thousands of requests a minute per second, or even more, right? So without proof of work, then it's relatively cheap initially to perform a DDoS attack, right? You can do it with your own computer and at least request a few thousand a second. And most average computers can do that no problem. So if you begin to require proof of work per request, the legitimate user will likely notice no performance difference. They won't even know that you've done this. But the abuser will incur just astronomically higher costs. It makes spam, DDoS, brute forcing, all this stuff economically less feasible. The challenge here, however, is making this proof of work system asymmetrical, so where it's arbitrary and very simple for the main server, the website, to confirm that you got the answer right, and much simpler than it is for you to actually solve it. Otherwise, we're getting nowhere, right? So back to the abstract again. So we propose a solution to the double spending problem using a peer-to-peer network. The network timestamps transactions by hashing them into an ongoing chain of hash-based proof of work, forming a record that cannot be changed without redoing that proof of work. The longest chain not only serves as proof of the sequence of events witnessed, but proof that it came from the largest pool of CPU power. So When you add hashing and proof of work, you have hash-based proof of work. Even further yet, in a very crude way, if you remember the live hashing example before, you see that as the chain gets longer, it gets harder and harder to replicate, and even identical bits of information in different succession, or if you're missing a succession, are totally different, just completely different. So over time, the network only gets stronger and stronger, even though it already started off very strong. As time goes on, it's only getting harder and harder to fake transactions. See, this is really where things start to get brilliant. And my gosh, we're like still in the, abstract here, like a few sentences into this thing. But in order to fake or change like a current block, one would first need to compute every single previous block and redo all of the work contained. That's an insanely high amount of work already, and really it's just getting bigger every day. So moving on. As long as the majority of CPU power is controlled by nodes that are not cooperating to attack the network, they'll generate the longest chain and outpace the attackers. So the chain, basically, to understand this, just in case you don't follow along yet, it takes CPU power to generate these hashes. So it's just mathematical certainty that whoever has the most CPU power will have the quickest, replicating, or not replicating, the quickest generation of these hashes. So as long as, the amount of people working with the network is, and not cooperating together, like you could have multiple people trying to attack the network on their own, but as long as they weren't cooperating and exceeding or becoming the majority of the CPU power, then the good people would generate the longest chain. So here is what we have: the 51% attack threat, right? And this is where it comes into play. Maybe you've heard about it with like ghash.io, for example, recently. This basically means that as long as there are legit people, or as long as there are more legit people than illegit people, then the legit people will always outpace the illegit people because they're working together. So in this case, however, it's not measured in legit people and illegit people. It's measured in CPU power. And this is why someone controlling 51% of the computing power of the network can be problematic, because they can figuratively, run away from the legit people with it, though they're able to compute faster than them. So this has been discussed in a few of my videos. Even if someone does reach this 51%, they actually still don't have that many options, because the reward for attacking the network is going to be less and very messy than the reward for actually working with the network. So if the motive is financial, then the attack is really economically not feasible, right? It doesn't make much sense. If you have that power, you'd be more, you'd make more money most likely, and at least you'd make a lot cleaner money, either by siphoning. So in the case of ghash.io, we were talking about it, and the true way to make money if you were ghash.io and you were being malicious would be to siphon the power and not let anybody know about it. It wouldn't be to attack the network. Because those network attacks, you can only continue that attack, right? So like double spending, for example, was an issue. So you could only continue to double spend so long as you maintained 51% of the network and its computational ability. So because of this, you would have to continue that and continue your double spending, and every double spent that you needed to do, you would have to maintain your 51% throughout all of the confirmation that you actually had that money to spend. So in the case of ghash.io, if they ever did hit 51%, people would just leave them, right? And we've seen this happen both times. And the reason why they continue hitting 50 or getting close to 51% is because they offer no fees to their mining pool. So if you don't know what ghash.io is they're a mining pool, and the idea of a mining pool is it's really rare that you'll be able to mine Bitcoin and actually get some Bitcoin yourself. It's just the likelihood is very low. So you might have to mine for a really long time before you actually acquire some Bitcoin. So the idea of a mining pool is that you just kind of pool together with people, and you get more of a steady stream of Bitcoin instead. So everyone shares the Bitcoin. And this is why siphoning the Bitcoin would make sense for a mining pool. And the reason why ghash.io is so popular is because they charge no fee. So, I mean, that's why. So anyways, even if someone reaches that 51%, the reward for attacking the network is less than the reward for either siphoning or working with the network. So like, let's say they aren't ghash.io. Let's say this is like some billionaire somewhere, and he's like, man, I want to be a trillionaire. He can't do it either, because it doesn't make fiscal sense to it. If you have that computational power, it just doesn't make fiscal sense to attack the network. It makes more sense to work for the network. You'd make more money. So that's just an example in that sense. Now, let's say the motive is malicious towards the network itself, and like the government, wants to take it out. Well, this is extremely costly. So you could stop the network from working, basically. If you controlled 51%, you could just say, no, we don't validate these chains, and your chain could be the longest, by one block, let's say. So you could use your power for something like that. But this is extremely costly, and it would be pretty much impossible to maintain over a sustained, period of time. So that's why really both of these 51% attacks, this is kind of why the protocol is just incredible, because the attack itself can't last. It doesn't make sense if your motive is financial, and it doesn't make sense if your motive is to destroy the network. It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't work mathematically. So that's why it's epic. Now, finally, after I don't even know how long it's going to be, we get to the end of the abstract. So the last of the abstract is, the network itself requires minimal structure. Messages are broadcast on a best effort basis, and nodes can leave and rejoin the network at will, accepting the longest proof of work chain as proof of what happened while they were gone. So here, just the reiteration that this is a simple structure. Yep, we got that. And then we get this, messages are broadcast on a best effort basis. What does that mean? So a good example of like best effort in play is typically going to be your internet service provider. So your plan is usually a best effort plan, meaning let's say you have a 50 megabytes per second plan. You would ideally get the 50 megabytes per second you pay for, but you're not guaranteed to get 50 megabytes per second. So in networking, a best effort system means there's an attempt to deliver everything, but there's no attempt to retry, and there's no guarantee. So another comparison here that's often made in real world terms is like the postal service's parcel post. A sender can send some mail, but there's no guarantee that it's going to arrive. And if it doesn't arrive, there's no attempt to retry by the system. Nor does the sender know through the postal service's system that the mail has arrived. Now, obviously now you can get delivery confirmation and all of that, and tracking and all of this stuff. But just the most basic parcel post from the post office is a pretty good representation of what best effort is. So we'll continue to break down the use of best effort in a little bit here, but there is good reason for it, actually. For now, we'll just leave it what it is, and just with the explanation of what best effort actually means, so you understand it. So, congratulations, we've made it through the abstract. It might not sound like it's much, right? But that actually was a lot of information, and it really serves as a fantastic explanation of Bitcoin already. I hope not everyone leaves at the end of this video. There is still a lot more to explain, but just the abstract alone, just like this little paragraph, gives a pretty good explanation of how Bitcoin works and why it works. So, I hope you guys are all still following along. If there's any part that was confusing up to here, please go ahead and post below. I'll do my best to clarify anything if I was confusing. So, stay tuned for the future videos regarding this Bitcoin paper. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for all the support and the subscriptions. And until next time.